Sorry for the delay. I had to fire somebody who was being disrespectful to me on the channel.
What's up, guys? I'm Bzra, aka Bzra Hacks, and today I'm going to share with you the Discord live chat between Crowfall director J. Todd Coleman and the major guild leaders of Crowfall. The discussion is led by the lovely Pan. I want to say thanks again to the staff of Crowfall for having these discussions, listening to the players, and for being awesome. I do apologize. I had to do some live tweaking to people's volumes as we went. This isn't perfect. We're doing it live! Without further ado, I'll stop talking.
Frostweaver is forever delayed, Jaster.
Frost what?
Alrighty, let's get started. I think we're only 1 minute behind, unless my clock is wrong. So welcome. This is our first ever Discord live chat. We're just going to kind of see how this goes. This is an entirely new thing for us. There's a forum thread that's up. So if you can give your feedback, not just about what we discussed today in the chat, but also just this format. We'd really like to hear from you about what you think, if you like this kind of format, if this is something that we should try to do again. A few things that I want to point out from the beginning. Today's topic is related to the article that Blazin wrote for us on Tuesday about capture point mechanics and the pros and cons of that. I do ask that you stay on topic. We're going to have to stick pretty close to the schedule. Our special guests today are some of the guild leaders from Crowfall that have been just early supporters of the game. They've been very active in testing, provided a lot of feedback to us. And, you know, people have like real jobs and we want them to keep those jobs because that's how they give us money. And we like that. So please stay on topic. And like I said, if you like this format, let us know about that. I am going to have to be kind of ruthless about muting people in the chat channel or even kicking people from the chat channel if you like cause us any grief. We just don't have time for that. So without further ado, let me introduce first our co-founder, the creative director, and the cool dude on the block, J. Todd Coleman. Todd, you want to say hello for people who aren't actually watching and they need to know who's talking? So,
hello, everyone. This is the sound of my voice, so now you know.
That's Todd, and I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Pan. I'm the director of community here at ACE. And then next up we have Blazin, who, like I said, wrote a guest article for us on Tuesday. Blazin, you want to say hi?
Yeah, this is Blazin. So this is the sound of my voice.
And we have Engelmar. Now, this is an interesting thing, and I want to just touch on this briefly because it gets a little confusing. You will see him post as Engelmar on the forums, but sometimes you hear us call him Mal because he has another name on Discord. So you want to explain about your name and just say?
I go by Angelmar, I go by Malfric, call me Mal, call me whatever, but I'm IC of Winterblades, and we've been testing Crowfall for 3.5 years now, I think.
And then last but not least, representing our brothers and crows from across the pond, we have Dravoix.
Hello, I'm Dravoix. I'm I'm the guild leader of Horizon, and yeah, I'm one of the biggest EU guilds.
All right, so there we go. Everybody's been introduced, and we are ready to hit the ground running. I would ask a couple of things. Number one, please do not PM the people who are participating in the audio chat today. It's kind of impolite, and it also is distracting. That's number one. Number two, if you have questions, you can tag me, just tag @Pan in the chat channel so I'll make sure that I see them. I can't guarantee everything's going to be answered, but we'll try to get to what we can. So, Blazin, do you want to start things since you did that great article and kind of talk about just your viewpoints on capture points in general for those who didn't bother to read?
Sure, we can kind of go over that a bit. So the changes from 5.8 to 5.8.1, we had changes in point values that kind of put a little bit more emphasis on the keeps instead of the forts, camps, and towers. And then the capture bonus pool was the other really big thing, and that is essentially a percentage of the points each turn, which is every 15 minutes, will go into a pool that builds up, and the next faction to capture that gets all of those points instant. So my thoughts on the effects on that, I thought that it would help with the night capping a little bit. Night capping being basically whenever the server is not as populated, you get people taking and flipping camps and forts, and you're getting points and holding those for free, essentially, without any kind of resistance. So that percentage, whatever the bonus pool is essentially going to mitigate that night capping by that percentage. And of course, it can also be multiplied by the seasonal multiplier, which is anywhere from 1x to 4x. 4x being in the winter, 1x in spring. And then just kind of went on about some changes and things that I'd like to see, which I think we should kind of dive into a little bit later. That's more or less the overview of the article for those that didn't get a chance to read it yet. I was kind of curious to hear what some of the other guild leaders thought about that. Like I briefly talked to Mal about it. Trav, I haven't heard from yet on that, so I was kind of curious to see what they thought about it.
So just on night capping specifically, it's certainly where most of the points are awarded. Who's ever late night crew stays up longest, gets the points. They stay capped. They don't usually get flipped for most of the evening, sometimes even through the workday. Order has a pretty big morning crew that can come in and cap stuff, and they'll hold it during the North American workday. But I think there needs to be more work done on where the point balance is awarded during prime time versus off hours.
Yeah, I am seeing that nearly the same. Just can to say, okay, the population in EU is even smaller, so even the smallest night capping in the night gives you guild or faction a huge boost. So as my guild is doing a lot of night capping, we won even one guild campaign around Christmas with that. So I have to say, night capping is bad, but you can't prevent it anyways.
And kind of my one thing that I wish I had actually put in that article I thought about later was I really think as far as adjusting these mechanics go, we need to find the intersection of fun and winning so that whatever it takes to win is also fun. Currently, what it takes to win is to capture empty objectives and off hours, or basically you're not getting contested at many of these capture points. The fun is in fighting, which we get at the keeps. We just need to get some mechanics in the game where these other objectives are fought over more often.
And this goes to something that maybe J. Todd can chime in here, is that there's a coordination problem in PvP. You have to have a known time, a known location, and some sort of incentive, limited objective, limited resource, limited whatever that people can fight over to get PvP to happen. That's why sieges work as a PvP driver. That's why in Shadowbane things like hot zones work, because everyone sees where it is on the map. Everyone can go there. They know there's good people are going to be there farming the nice drops and everything. But we're still missing that for forts. So I don't know if J. Todd wants to jump in there.
We're definitely seeing that forts are. Oh, hold on real quick. Sorry, I've got Gordon in the same office as me. I'm hearing myself, and it's very distracting. All right, so can you guys hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so as a designer, you got to remember there's some things that I can control and some things that I can't, right? So ultimately, when people in play, what our peak concurrency is when people get into the game versus when they fall off is primarily driven by players' real lives, not driven by anything we can do. We can have some effect to beef it up a little bit. We can have some effect to beef it up a little bit by having events or things that happen within core hours, but ultimately that curve is driven by people's real lives more than it's driven by anything that we do. So what I'm going to try and do is, instead of fighting against that, I'm trying to engineer systems that basically assume that curve and have more opportunities to fight happen along the same curve as the peak hour. So I actually have a series of charts that go through and game by game look at what the general time fall off is for people ramping into prime time and ramping off. I'm going to match that same bell curve for opportunities to fight. That way, when you have troughs where there are less people on, there's less places that pop up that they want to go fight, because that'll concentrate so that hopefully we have the same general concentration of players around any given hotspot. So we did it with keeps for starters, and what we saw now in the first campaigns that we ran was that the forts were really the things that made all the difference. The outposts change hands so often that really, generally speaking, that was kind of a wash. So it was ownership of the forts that really made the variations in score over the course of the last campaigns, both in EU and in the US.
I think, though, if you look at Blazen's math in his article, and I didn't do the math, but you're looking at like 60% of the points getting awarded, in off hours, essentially. And, if night capping was a marginal activity, something that is deciding 10 or 20%, certainly there's off hour players. They shouldn't be denied content, and they should be able to contribute. But I think maybe the balance still needs some more work on off hours capping versus prime time.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, remember, we just got the system up, and then immediately after that, we adapted the system over to have the capture bonus pool. So we've really now run 2 test campaigns with the math set the way it is. So it's our first iteration on the system. So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of changes that still need to be made to move it for quite frankly, from my standpoint, for a first cut coming up, it actually worked very, very well. So you guys aren't really playing for real yet. So at the end of the day, there was a lot of people that were flipping things because they just either weren't defended or because the defenders who were online chose not to be there. That's not a good indicator of player behavior in the long run, but it did allow us to get system testing. And mathematically speaking, it showed me that the capture bonus mechanic actually did work. Even this morning, looking at the overall scores, if someone were to take a keep right now, it could potentially change the entire flow of the campaign. So that's great news from a mechanics standpoint. Remember that I can change the numbers. We can go through and do rebalancing. But if the basic system is functional, that's great. I like to get the foundation a little bit more firm, and then I'm going to look at adding more layers of functionality on top of it to deal with some of the issues. I like the idea of the outpost and the campfires and the towers out there being more dynamic, that they can flip and change hands all the time. The forts need to be now ratcheted down so that you can't have a group of 5 people sweep across multiple worlds, taking all the forts and flipping them undefended. That clearly was not the intent.
And I think it's important to point out too, with the off hours thing, we're not saying I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't think your intention is to say there's not going to be anything capturable in off hours. It's just going to scale to where if you have less people online, there's less available to capture. So it focuses those people on those fewer objectives so that there's still a critical mass to create conflict.
Right, exactly. So if at peak time, peak versus trough, we have 8 times the user population, which is surprisingly predictable, but let's say it actually falls out to be 8. It's a little different for every game. Once we have it locked in, though, it will have a pretty good idea of where it will actually be for the game overall. Let's just say, though, for example, it's 8 times. Then in off hours, I would want 1/8 or somewhere thereabouts of the number of contested locations. That way I'm still getting good solid fights out of those locations.
Yeah, that's important to note. I think there are some people, there are off hours players who are rightfully concerned with that. That's good to know.
From a pure mechanics, so looking at not the numbers, not how it's all sorting out, but just mechanics, for forts, there's still an issue of, it's not even necessarily that you don't want to defend them, but defending them is almost impossible. By the time you have notice, there's no way you're going to get a force rallied, move it to the fort, because it's going to take forever to run there. So there's some sort of, the notice on forts, if they are to be defended, either needs to shift to maybe a windows of opportunity system or some other system to help solve that coordination problem.
Yeah, it's actually both. So I agree with you. So, so somebody put in there that walls are worthless. I'll actually go you one better. Walls are actually negatively, they're not beneficial to you. They're actually a hindrance because they block line of sight right now for the guard. So we need to get through that. There's a whole host of kind of detail level issues that are causing that whole the forts and the keeps to some degree as well, just to not quite work the way we want them to. So we need to get on the other side of those issues. Notification system, though, is also something we need to deal with. So I like that we have a last ditch modal pop-up notification that goes out zone wide. I think that we also need an early warning notification system that players can either opt into or opt out of, which, you know, it'll be a little more spammy because it'll be something like the guards letting you know whenever they see an enemy within sight. But that early notification system could then be used like through a chat channel or something like that to let people know, hey, there could be a fight here, and then you can choose whether to go or not. And then the second fallback is kind of the late indicator of, hey, something's really happening. Mounts would help this as well. We had mounts in. Well, no art, but we at least had the functionality in. We pulled them out because what we were noticing is they were only being used by our hardest core players. And I'd like to go back and reapproach that and see if we can introduce them earlier in the gameplay experience, because then it also allows you to rally and get there faster. So there's a couple of these pieces that are all have to be tied together. And I want to make that my kind of next focus now that we have a capture pool that works, is I want to work on the fort and keep game to get those closer to where we want them to be.
Regarding outposts, why is the idea not why we don't make outposts like spots? They can spot something like a notification if an outpost see an enemy in your territory, so you get that directly on your chat and you see, okay, they are at the moment, this and this person is at this outpost, so you would know an outpost had also an effect on it.
We certainly can. That's something. Oh, sorry, I'm getting feedback again, but we certainly can. That's something that I think if we get it in for keeps and forts first, the next step is going to be how far do we want to push it down, and we have to balance that with the fact that it could be very, very spammy. So it could be that we want to do it radius based instead of zone wide. I think the system's pretty flexible though for us to be able to accommodate.
Everyone misses mounts. I don't know. I guess I can't speak for new players who really don't understand the game, and there is a big learning curve in Crowfall, but lots of folks miss mounts.
Yeah, as a half giant, I really miss mounts.
Yeah, so I think we should be able to get them back. We had them in, we pulled them out specifically because we were worried about it. We got the testing that we needed, but now it's one of those things that once you get used to it, you notice when it's lacking. You didn't notice it as much before, but now that you're used to it, losing it, all of a sudden you can feel it. It's like a dull ache of a missing limb.
Oh, we noticed the long times to go to a fort before. It's there was some long travel times to try to find PV. There's a comment in the Discord here about mounts for going far equals miss, mounts for PvP engaging and disengaging from fights not so much, and that's definitely true. The ability to like mount up mid combat was kind of annoying.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? Is these things almost never come online 100% fully featured, right? They always get in kind of bits and spurts. And so unfortunately, inevitably, there's always some benefit to it and some problems with it. And so we're always faced with this, okay, do we leave it in this kind of half working state, or do we pull it back out, finish it, and then bring it back up? And that it's just case by case, right? It's very challenging, actually. I've never been through this process before, but the idea of basically creating a game while people are actively trying to play it is very interesting. It's kind of like the worst of both worlds between developing a game and then launching it, or running a live game, because you're kind of having to treat it like a live game while you're still making massive overhaul changes, and that creates some unique challenges.
In the same topic, I was kind of curious. So when I started writing that article, I based a lot of it actually off of a previous article that Todd wrote that had differing values for the camps, forts, and keeps, the actual point values, not the multipliers, to where those point values would increase as the seasons went on. And I'm wondering, I don't think that is in currently, and I'm wondering if that's still in the works.
Sorry, I missed that last bit. If what's still in the works?
So in the earlier teaser articles, like the beginning of January, it had a chart showing that the point values of each of the types of capture locations, like for example, if the camps and towers started at 20 points in the spring, they went up to like, I don't know, 40 or 60 or 90 points, in the later seasons. And as far as I can tell right now, all of the point values stay the same. It's just that capture bonus pool multiplier that increases.
Yeah, so we actually do have the system in place now to be able to adjust that. So we've got all three of the tables that I outlined. So the thing that the thing that makes it challenging, right, is you guys live in a world of points. Like if we go in and modify that table in a dramatic way, all of a sudden it completely changes the game from your perspective. I don't really live in a world of points, right? I've got a big team, or well, I mean, not for MMO standards, but it's a fair number of people. I got a handful of guys here who all own different parts, right? Like Valerie owns the vendors, and Brandon, owns the all the rewards that you get out of the shop, and Blair owned and Hallish owned all the powers. So I kind of have to carve that stuff up and hand it to other people. So when I do a write up like that, I literally will put into the chart like, all right, here's some test numbers, and I mark every one of them as just a reminder, the numbers above are not real numbers. But it doesn't matter how many times I remind people, you guys are so used to looking at the numbers and caring about the numbers that inevitably I find myself in conversations about the numbers and have to say, yeah, I'm really not the person to deal with the numbers, quite frankly. I couldn't. There's just a game like this is way too large, and I'm not very good at table balance, quite frankly. So I let other people who are stronger at it deal with it. I do more high concept, high level design, and then I pass it to other people. So if, for example, that's one that needs to be addressed, then we certainly have the ability to do it, because I did the overall game design to make sure that table was exposed so the designers could tweak those knobs. But I wouldn't be the person to actually do it. It would fall on Han Shadow or somebody else.
I got you. It was actually a comment that Mal made to me about some of the strategy as far as wanting to take points. Actually, I shouldn't put words in your mouth. Maybe he could go over his thoughts on that, and we could kind of go from there. Do you remember what I'm talking about, Mal?
Well, specific to this, it was an observation that at least in the current system is implemented, spring points are worth more than winter points, because winter points, your enemy is going to get 80% of them back no matter what, because these forts will flip during the off hours regularly. Whereas spring points, they're only ever going to get 20% of that back. So you can build a lead in spring, where in winter it's not really going to be as easy or feasible to build that lead.
Well, no, that's not true. The multiplier is applied. The multiplier in winter is applied to all of the points that have built up, not just the points that were created during winter. So if you're sitting on 100 points that you banked during spring, that's going to turn into 400 points later down the line.
Right, which is why keeps right now are worth like 800,000 points, but other than keeps, everything else flips regularly. So
right.
that capture bonus is getting drained during spring. It's just always resetting.
And so, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought that when maybe I didn't finish the thought earlier when we were talking about forts. So forts need to also be set up on that bell curve so that they're not all available all the time. That was not really the intent. I need to find a way now to extend not necessarily the same siege window system, but a window system down to the forts as well.
So I guess where we're going with this is I really liked the idea of spring being more about harvesting and kind of preparing for the winter to come, and that winter be more about conflict and sieges and things like that. And when we had the table that would actually modify the point values and have those increase, that was to me preferable to only a capture bonus pool multiplier for the reasons that Mal pointed out.
Well, we certainly could change it. It wouldn't be particularly hard. What would be interesting on that is this ramp up effect that we're seeing as we go into fall and winter on each campaign, that would be then multiplied, right? It wouldn't just be additive. Is not only would the later seasons be building up more points, they'd also be building up more capture points, and they'd also then get the higher multiplier. So I think you'd see more flipping towards the end of the campaign. But frankly, maybe that's what we want. I mean, if that's at some point, this is a conversation I had with somebody recently about EU, where they said, well, we're just turtling up every night. Like, there's no reason for us to come out of our keep. As you hit the end of winter, if you're in third place, that is not a very good strategy. You know you're going to lose, so you might as well at that point take some risks, because otherwise you're going to come out, in last place.
So winter is pretty punishing for both activity and for resource gathering until you get very deep in the training trees and have a lot of great tools, gear, and a whole lot of min-maxing involved. So I'm all for reducing the importance of spring for points and making it more important towards the end, just for that reason, because it's spring, folks want to be harvesting, but they're having to balance that very heavily with generating points then if they
Cool.
want to
Well, I noticed Todd sitting in the chat right now, so after this chat is over, I'll go over next door and talk to him and Jonathan and Brandon about it and see if they can come to a consensus. I'm not opposed to it. I mean, as long as we're not concerned that it's going to make the game too flippy at the end, so much so that people now feel like spring and summer, it just was not important, right? That's the balance that we have to walk.
I don't think it'll become flippy, assuming we have the vulnerability or notifications or whatever on the forts. It'll just mean the conflict is going to get ratcheted up around those objectives, assuming you can, kind of force people into that conflict, and it's just not running around capturing empty objectives because they're all open at the same time.
And maybe the modifier for holding points, and it doesn't ramp up as swiftly as for capture points. Maybe it should be a smaller multiplier. Maybe in winter it's only 2x for holding points, and that could reduce that flippiness. But I think there's certainly room to, as you say, iterate on that.
Yeah, and one other thought too was if winter is that punishing on harvesting, that especially that plentiful harvest modifier. I mean, that's something that could potentially be looked at. It's not something I decided to go into in that article. I mean, there are foods and buffs and potions that we didn't used to have that now stack. That's pretty nice. But that is one other area that could be looked at is if it's too good in the spring and too punishing in the winter, then that could always be changed too.
Yeah, well, I certainly think we're going to have more balance passes that need to be done on all of that stuff. I mean, if it's the loop that exists, right, where you're supposed to go to a quarry to collect stone to bring back and build your walls, literally, I mean, it doesn't even have a first pass on it right now because the walls are, as we discussed earlier, ineffective and counterproductive. But there's a ton of that stuff that still needs to be looked at, and we'd kind of been kicking the can on it because we're still waiting on major pieces like caravans. And until that system came online, it felt like we were going to spend a lot of time setting up something in terms of balance, only to watch it immediately have to be redone from the ground up when another major system comes online. Thankfully, we're getting closer and closer to the end of that list.
So what do you think about the spawn and spawn mechanics? I had made a suggestion to remove the respawn from rune gates to kind of give the game a little bit more of a territory control feel where, any respawn point is something that could be fought over, outside, of course, of the beachhead.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I was working on the write-up for that this morning. So we have basically two competing design goals on that we're a little concerned about, and we'll continue to flesh it out. But the question of do I crow at my corpse and then have to fly back to a temple or a respawn location, or do I crow at a temple location and have to spawn back to my corpse? There's definitely pros and cons either way. So I tend to lean right now towards you crow at your corpse and then fly back to one. It solves a really nasty problem that I don't like, which is how do I pick where to respawn you? Because there's no good easy answer for that, right? If one particular or temple or respawn location is being totally camped, then it actually sucks for the game to just pick that for me. So it gets very, very complicated. If we do spawning at your corpse and then having you fly somewhere to respawn, that solves that issue nicely. It also means that literally people could, a faction could, or a guild could drive you from a world completely by denying you all of the respawn locations at the world. That obviously assumes that we pull it off of gates, so you can't use rune gates. So I could, if at that point, if I wanted to attack another world, I would have to get a foothold there. My gut is then we'd need to also include some other kind of respawn location, maybe a third type of outpost. Right now we've got campfires, we've got towers, maybe put in a third one that is a god statue that can be captured. That way people can use that to gain a foothold onto a world and from there try and spread. So you're right, it would push a little bit more into territory control and having a front line, which is kind of cool. And it also solves a major problem. The big downside of that approach is the fear that people will pop as a crow above their corpse and not know where to go. So we'd have to make sure that we flip the messaging on that to, instead of steering you back to your corpse, from the temple, we'd have to steer you from your corpse back to a nearby or maybe even not that close respawn location. I still would keep in the G to recall the temple as an ultimate fallback as well.
Yeah, I think that would really help new players too. That G to fall back to the temple. Just because essentially at that point you would die. When you died, you would spawn as a crow right at your body, and then you would fly to a respawn location. If you didn't have a respawn location in that zone, you would have to be able to cross into another zone to respawn. And then once you respawned, if you wanted to run back for whatever you lost on your corpse, then you would have to run back out there. And I mean, there might be points where people are like, look, this isn't worth it. Just, beam me back to the temple.
Yeah, I like that proposal overall. So we're still discussing it because there are some concerns about making sure that we message it correctly. One of the biggest remaining challenges I think that we have going from where we are now to launch is we've got a lot of depth to this game. There's actually a tremendous amount of depth, more than a lot of launched games, but we don't necessarily surface all that depth in a way that players know that it's there, get excited about it, and then can dig in and understand it. So I think that's one of our big challenges that we're going to have to face here, over the next couple of months.
Well, my thought on that, as far as once you become that crow, is the compass markers are actually a really good thing to utilize. And let's just say, for example, you had a fort to respawn at in that zone, put the respawn on the compass. Then if you didn't have a fort in that zone, could you then put the rune gate? In other words, if you had a respawn point in a rune gate a zone over, put that rune gate on the compass so they knew to fly to the rune gate. And then once you're in that zone, then it would, highlight that fort on the compass.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. The other thing I'll mention is that I am well aware, and the team is well aware, that the crow controls are fairly terrible. I'll just be kind of brutally honest. So the crow was, we got it in. I'm glad that we got it in. It served a purpose, but it doesn't feel good at all. So we need to make a full additional pass on the crow form to actually make it feel good as a game concept. Right now, you feel tethered to the ground. It's clunky. It's weird. It moves too slowly. Just in general, it doesn't feel very polished. So that's another thing we have to make a pass on between now and launch.
Well, another benefit of spawning as a crow at your corpse versus the other way around is if you did give the crow's ability to fly and things like that, and the respawn remained as it is now, you could then use that respawn radius to fly into places like behind walls that you couldn't get otherwise and then respawn. Whereas if you have to fly out to a respawn location that you can control, then that's no longer an issue. So you could give crows all kinds of, flying, whatever.
Yeah, that has been a concern too, is we don't want to, it's very hard when you're designing these systems to think about, all right, well, this is something that people will use in their bag of tricks. Like, you don't want crow form to suddenly become the best travel mechanic, or people will be, killing themselves on purpose just to go into crow form so that they can transport across the map.
Definitely favor respawning at a respawn location, not at your corpse. Death Shroud's obviously intended to persist through logout and through zoning, so that's not really an issue. But with these new systems you're conceiving, J. Todd, what is your thoughts on, I guess, either Death Shroud or a timer? Where do you think you're going with?
So Death Shroud, and so there's really two different things, right? One is the block out from being able to just jump right back in and immediately back in the combat, because it makes the combat feel like it's just endless if you have instantaneous respawn and re-engagement. So I think we're going to need something different than Death Shroud. Death Shroud, I mean, there's a history of it, right? We had Death Shroud all the way back in Shadowbane. So I'm not opposed to the idea of a Death Shroud, but having just a stacking effect on you when you come out of death, I don't think it's the ideal way to tackle that problem. So I think my guess is we're going to find that we need both. We need a block out before, so a block out timer before you can respawn from crow form that starts relatively easy, but stacks and gets worse with each subsequent death within a time period. And separate from that, we'll do a Death Shroud, but we don't need it to be necessarily as harsh and as punishing.
Yeah, there's a comment in the Discord from Zephic. Seems like Death Shroud is hard for new players to grasp, and I definitely agree with that. There's definitely times where you find newbies in a fort that you're capturing, you kill them, and they respawn, and you don't even want to kill them again, but they just like are suiciding in and attacking you. And I don't think people really get that, so there needs to be some better messaging there.
Yeah, Death Shroud was one of those situations where we saw a problem, we threw in what we could get done to quickly try and fix it, but we knew that it wasn't going to be the ideal long-term solution. So it's another one we have to go back and look at again. Once we have the blocking mechanic in, then I think we'll take another look at Death Shroud, because it doesn't need to be so punishing.
It definitely helped the early 5.8 endless death spam fights, which
the persistence issues, those are just, we just haven't gotten to it yet. It's not, I can't even call it a bug. It's not a bug. It's just functionality that we haven't gotten to yet. So
one other thing about respawn at location versus respawn at your corpse. So after a fight, we want to rally. We want to go back. We want to keep having that fun PvP content. To rally is a real pain right now when you're spawning at your corpse, because there's maybe people there corpse camping you. There may be people are spawning in various different locations because they died at different points during the fight. One of the big advantages of respawn at a certain location is it means everyone's respawning in the same place. As soon as everyone's up and out of Death Shroud or Timer or whatever it is, your force is back ready to go and ready to go generate some more content, go get some more PvP.
Yeah, except unfortunately, it's not actually that clean of a rule. So what happens is right now, when you die, it looks for a nearby location that it can respawn you. However, if you're within a certain radius, I think it's 250 meters of a location, it doesn't choose that one, because we didn't want people stuck in the situation where they were respawning and just being killed over and over and over and over. So it is actually kind of messy. So I could make an argument that having you fly to a spot is actually better, because then you just coordinate over your chat. Hey, we're all going to respawn at A17. You can actually use the coordinates, from the map. So it might actually be easier to rally. Just that, the repeated kill over and over and over and over, it doesn't actually work very well for the game long term, because that results for a lot of people in a log off moment, and for some people in a quit moment, and that's obviously not ideal. And just asking people nicely not to do it, that's not going to work.
Yeah, so I clearly wasn't communicating well, because you're arguing my point is that we should not be spawning at corpses. Spawning at corpses is not fun time.
Yeah, so what do you mean by spawning? Actually coming back alive, not the crow spawning there, but actually, entering your vessel.
Sorry, crowing at corpses. Now I'm with you. When you said spawning, I thought you meant, where does the crow appear? So you're suggesting it sounds like you're in agreement also that it would be better for the crow to appear above the corpse and then go choose where it wants to.
Yep.
Correct,
Yeah, we're all
yes.
talking about the same thing. And the other thing you'll get is kind of a defender's advantage. Like, for example, if I'm defending a keep and I die right next to that keep, I can respawn again there, but I have to wait out that timer first. So that's the real important thing about that timer, so you can't just respawn over and over again. It gives the defenders a little bit of advantage, which is usually wanted in most games. And then the other thing it does is it makes, assuming we remove the respawn from the rune gates, if I'm going to assault a keep, I'm going to want to take that fort that's near the keep so that I have a closer respawn location. That's currently not the case, because a lot of times the rune gates are closer to the keep than the forts are anyways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so yeah, I think we're all talking about the same thing. I definitely agree with you. I think it's a better model. There's just some nervousness about messaging, but frankly, that's the world we live in. Every time we make a change, we get nervous about the messaging. So, so thanks for the feedback on that one. I'll take it back to Blair and the design group, and we'll discuss. One other point, by the way, is once we get in that respawn blocking technology or that mechanism, we may find that we don't need the death shroud anymore. Frankly, it may be that that's just an unnecessary punishment to put on somebody who already just died.
So just talking about almost design goals or problems to solve for death and respawn, it's you need to keep somebody who's been killed out of the fight for about 5 minutes so that there's an actual meaning to securing a kill. And I would also add that rallying and respawning that force somewhere else that is losing so that they can come back and keep creating content is another major point that needs to be addressed in the respawn mechanics, however they come out.
Are you done with all that respawning? Or I don't know, what's about the questions about the community? The community is asking a lot of questions. I don't know, Pan, if you... Pan is having the questions. Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm saving all the questions. My thinking is that we probably won't get to them today, but there's probably 3 news articles that we can write just based on the questions that have been.
Well, let's hear some of them. Might as well tackle a couple.
Everyone wants to talk about performance.
Yeah, so that's a fine one actually to jump into. So okay, so we've got a major initiative that we've actually been working on for many months that deals with performance, not just client but server as well. We're just not ready to do it, and it's just, I mean, it's still cooking. It's actually up and in testing now, but it's got little weird tendrils that touch on everything else in the game because it basically overhauls how characters and monsters move around in our game universe. So it touches everything. I mean, it touches everything from teleport to how the camera feels, to how the characters feel, to how the monsters work, to how the monsters move around. It touches, I mean, we've got about 1,300 powers and unique powers in the game at this point, and it probably touches all of them. I don't know. It's a pretty high percentage if it's not all. So, so yeah, that's all in the works. In the meantime, what you guys have been seeing is kind of incremental little jumps forward and then fall back, and then we'll get a little further, and then we fall back and get a little further and fall back. So we're pushing on that. We're trying to get the effort out. We know that it's absolutely key and vital. There's actually 2 parts to it. One is just the server being able to handle a bunch of people, and I think that we're going to be very happy with the result of that change on this. The other then is the client performance, right? FPS, and that's one of the things that usually, it's not odd that it comes near the end of a project. I'm glad that we're to the point where we can finally start to really dig in and look at it. We have some early things that we're going to do, and then we have more stuff that's coming later. We will get there. I know it seems hard if you haven't been through this process before. It seems, it's kind of like, hey, well, you've got these issues, why haven't you fixed them? And it's just that kind of stuff is very, very much fine tuning. And when you're making massive changes to the systems that are surrounding it, inevitably you break things. It is coming though, and so within the next, I'd say, few months, you're going to see a few more of these little incremental things, and then we're going to drop a big nuke, which should hopefully wipe the problems out. I know I've been saying that for a long time, but it is what it is. So hopefully pretty soon here you won't have to believe me anymore because you'll be able to get in and play it.
Okay, let me ask one of these questions that we got earlier. And this is from, let me see, from Jaster, who said, oh, wait, no, not that one. Sorry, I marked the wrong one. This is from, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. If you are sensitive about that, get an easier name. Zefx, so it's Zefx. The question is, the larger question is how to prevent the Uncle Bob scenario where one faction vastly outnumbers any other faction. The point value shouldn't be a question of who has the most numbers. Now, this is something that Todd has specifically mentioned in several of the articles that have been published by us about the capture mechanics. And for those who don't get the Uncle Bob reference, there was a clip in our Kickstarter video where actually it was our design director Blair who played Uncle Bob, and this scenario we're explaining like people playing Risk, and if you just come back to the game over time, like eventually you have your Uncle Bob, who's just this, as Todd put it, unassailable tyrant. Like there needs to be a way to kind of hit the reset button, and that's was the whole inspiration for making Crowfall with the dying worlds. Anyway, so Todd, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, because it sounds like we keep trying to achieve this, but there are still concerns that Uncle Bob's going to be the one who wins.
Well, okay, so you're conflating two different problems. So the Uncle Bob scenario is actually slippery slope. That is systems that are designed in a way that the strong players who gain an advantage automatically continue to be able to improve that advantage with less work than it takes for other people to catch up. So the capture bonus pool, for example, mechanic that we just put in is specifically an anti-slippery slope. The goal of that system is to allow catch-up mechanics for players that are falling behind to be able, through heroic efforts, not going to make it easy, but through cleverness or good solid skill, can overcome that gap and still pull into a leadership position. So, and the capture bonus pool actually mechanically has done a really good job of that. We haven't run longer campaigns, so we'll need to see how it plays out over a longer period of time. But I believe that the basics of that system are pretty solid. So that's really Uncle Bob. What you're talking about is just large team advantage, like just a overwhelming force. And my answer there is really it depends. So if you have a situation where we want to lock down and ensure fairness, we can absolutely have campaigns that do that, right? Right now, we could go in and put faction locks that say you need to sign up for this campaign, and if you, or rather, you need to sign up for a particular faction on this campaign, and if you're not part of the 1,000 people that sign up for each of the factions, then you can't jump in. So we can put in things that limit participation. I haven't wanted to do that so far because those are the only campaigns we have, and I just absolutely have not wanted to do anything that would cause people to break up their guilds. So we can put in mechanics like that. That said, we're going to have campaigns like the Dregs where that's just a thing. If we want to allow people of different size groups to be able to come in, then smaller teams are likely going to have to be that much better, or they're going to have to team up with other smaller teams to be able to take on larger forces. So it's not just a matter of forces, right? Forces is one of the things that you need to worry about. The other is really player skill. And I saw this way back on Shadowbane. Player skill is not a linear curve. It's not like, hey, I'm a 2 on the scale out of 10. So you put 2 of me together and I'm equal to one player who's a skill level of 4. It's actually a incredibly exponential curve where the people who are really good are just amazing at the game, and the people then fall off very dramatically down from that. So I'm not going to go so far as to say the larger team is always going to win, because you do have a dose of that. You do have a good solid dose of player skill can make up huge numbers. But if you have teams that are not forced to be equal, then it's, by definition, you're going to have lopsided forces, and you have to deal with that. That's going to be the nature of some of the campaigns. So that's kind of by design. I don't have a solution for that problem because that's the way that game rule set was set up in the first place. So, either get good or get more people.
Get good.
So, what is your opinion about...
And by the way, this is how Play to Crush started as a phrase. I just realized that 2 seconds after it came out of my mouth.
So, what is your opinion, or what is your idea of getting players more into playing in the winter? Because I mean, we have the catch-up mechanic, but still people getting... will drop the campaign because they see, oh yeah, the numbers are so big, the difference of the numbers are so big that they will actually siege again or capture stuff because the numbers are too big and demotivating people to capture. Will there something except the points, for example, harvesters, to make, if you hold a completely zone, that you're getting a bonus above for harvesting on the zone, or getting some special materials that you only get from outposts or other stuff?
Yeah, there are some things that we can do that will try to offset that effect to some degree. Though again, there are certain things that while I can kind of shape player behavior as a designer, I can't just flat out change the way people work, right? Shadowbane showed me very clearly when we ran our beta campaigns, which I call them campaigns because they had a natural reset, because occasionally the game would change so much we had to do a wipe, so that effectively it was an accidental campaign. But the pattern of behavior there was that we would put up a new campaign, and that early land rush would lead to absolutely like historically high player peak concurrency numbers. Like 25-30% of the players that were active would get in for that initial rush, and it would fall off over the course of the campaign. And that's just a slope that I can do some things to adjust, but ultimately that's just player behavior. So there will be some fall off that occurs naturally as some people go, yeah, I'm losing and I don't like the feeling of losing. They may not even quit the game. They may just join another campaign to get that initial land rush feeling again. So I can put in some rewards that will try to entice people to stick around till the end, but ultimately there's only so much I can do. And it's not like this is a problem that other games don't have. I mean, hell, if you've ever been to a football game and seen the point spread get big enough, the audience just leaves. I mean, that's just normal player behavior. So I don't have a miracle cure to all of these problems. At some point, we'll do the best that we can. We'll offset it the best we can. I can come up with campaign rules that come to an early conclusion if one team has a runaway success, but people are people. You know, there's only so much I can do.
I had a thought on that actually, is to like incentivize the individual to stick around. Is what if that personal score that you get, which is currently only tied to capture points, it would need to be expanded into the all three spheres, you know, combat, crafting, exploration part of the game. But what if that personal score somehow translated into the number of exports you got, and you know, as the season goes on, those multipliers kick in so that you're able to build up more and more exports, you know, in the wintertime versus the springtime, so that, you know, you could then export some of the stuff you got from the campaign, and maybe that would be something that people would stick around for.
Well, we certainly can, though there are some players who just don't care about those. And right that, so I'm always asked, well, how are you going to appeal? What reward are you going to offer a player who doesn't care at all about the rewards? And the answer is, there's no answer to that question. I don't know what you want to say. But yeah, certainly we are already looking, even for first sanction, right? We're already looking at a reward scheme that is not necessarily a single vector. Because if you have a single vector reward, for example, if the reward was all of the players in the winning faction get X, well, then you're going to not really have any competition. Instead, you're going to have collusion where everybody just jumps into the same faction. So we're already having to look at reward structures that have different vectors to make that not a simple decision.
Okay, Todd, here's a question for you, and this is from Wolfie. The campaign is almost over. Are you pleased with how it went? Are you pleased with how the campaign testing has gone so far? Like, if you could dial back, what would you change? But what do you think we need more of?
Well, I just need more iterations. No, I mean, I am very pleased with it. Do I think it was an amazing, fantastic, blow the doors off everything experience? No. Do I think it was a great step forward for us? Absolutely. I mean, what you're going to see over time is us continuing to do what we're doing, which is we take an experience, we get it up, we try to make it a little longer, we try to add a little more depth, we try to add some more balance, we learn what we can from it, and we do it again. So from that standpoint, the last ones were the longest campaigns we've run so far. They tested the capture point mechanic, which we'd never really had a chance to. We didn't even have it before. So, and what I learned from it was, hey, this actually does work. Now, it's not necessarily balanced correctly, and it's not necessarily driving the player behavior that we want because we don't have enough players. I mean, one of the challenges we're dealing with right now is just we don't have enough people online to cover and defend all the places that need to be defended. So I learned a tremendous amount from it. I think the next ones will be that much better as a result. So from that standpoint, hell yes, I think they were successful. Are there things that I wish had gone differently? Of course. I mean, like, server performance and client performance alone is something that has continued to stunt us because it's a chicken and egg, right? While I'd like to have more people in to defend all the locations, that only works if it works. If the servers can't handle it, then it just doesn't work. So we still have a ways to go. I'm not fooling myself into thinking that we're there, but I do think this kind of cadence that we've built up over the last couple years of constant, steady progress. People can argue you should have done this first, or this was a bad decision, or you should have really dealt with this. And a lot of those critiques will be absolutely valid. But what we can't be accused of is not making constant, steady progress towards our vision. I think even our staunchest kind of critics would have to look at us and go, no, that's a good point. They are clearly marching towards something, and they're making their way to it.
On the subject of constant, steady progress, I get tons and tons of questions. You see them from noobs all the time. You know, when is you guys are still building the game? When are you going to be switching over towards balance and polishing, especially of the, I guess, the combat model and the classes themselves? I think you could argue that maybe half the promotions are viable right now, and there's just always, you know, this character is overpowered or whatever. Are you thinking alpha, beta? When are you thinking that balancing the game is going to start becoming a larger focus of the iterative process?
Well, it's been a focus this whole time, and it will continue to be a focus. I mean, I remember that different people in the organization do different things. It's not like I go to, you know, Mark, one of our engineers, and say, hey, I've got a problem with the vendor system right now. And he says, I can't deal with that right now. I'm trying to figure out how to balance the half giant champion. So I've got teams that are dedicated to these different things. What you guys will see is that the focus will shift over time from implementation of new things to going back and relooking at old things. And you can already tell that that's happened, right? You're already looking at the patch notes, I'm sure, and noticing that we're going back and kind of shoring up and fixing things on the engineering side. Usually in terms of the overall cadence, engineering is typically kind of the long leg. Their stuff takes a lot of time to cook. Art kind of comes in fits and spurts. Like you'll see one day you'll log in and the temple will all of a sudden no longer have textures that say temp, which is, by the way, for temporary, not for temple. And suddenly that thing will just be online. Design, though, is kind of like it's both. You've got long tail things that just pop into place, like all of a sudden talent trees are there, but there's also a constant cadence every week of going back and fixing powers and adjusting powers and noticing things are not on and things like that. I think that if you actually were to look at the patch notes for any given release, you would be surprised how many design changes are made on a constant basis. That process just basically never stops. In fact, it won't even stop after launch. It'll just continue the way it's always been.
Alrighty, we are almost out of time. We've got a few more minutes, so I just wanted to give you guys a chance for any closing thoughts. Anybody have one last thing they want to add?
Well, for me, I would just say that when I said that the players get to help shape this strategy game, that's really true. I mean, I can't tell you how much of our feedback has gone into this game. This dev team listens more than any other game I've been a part of, and I've been playing these sorts of games for 20 years now. So, you know, if you have feedback, you know, leave it on the forums. Even if they don't respond to you, they do read it and they do act on it.
I agree with that. You know, Winterblades has been together 18 years, 19 years, and we've done lots of alphas and betas. I've never had a dev team actually respond to half the stuff. The Darkfall team was especially bad at not responding to anything the beta and alpha testers were saying. I mean, the entire combat model at one point in the last 3 years was completely redone based on player feedback. So,
yeah, we've done that too, right? We've had massive systems. I mean, combat is a great example, right? We went through, I think, 3, maybe 4 great iterations where we kind of overhauled everything, and we've still got one big additional one coming, right, with the client controller changes. But I'm glad you guys recognize that. You know what you don't see from our standpoint is that we're swimming constantly in a sea of feedback. So figuring out how to separate the kind of noise signal from the noise on that, and then prioritizing and getting it in, is quite challenging, but it's also very, very fulfilling as a development methodology, right? Because it does mean we have a more direct connection with our players on this game than I have ever experienced. And that's really, really cool. I'm hoping that it also has a payoff at the end. I won't know till we get there, but I'm hoping that the result at the end is a better game, because usually what happens is developers go off and they cook up what they think players are going to like, and they spend years and years and years working on it, and they don't even announce the game until it's like, a year or two out. And then they get people testing at the very end, and they better hope that they actually called it correctly, because if they didn't, then they don't have a market. And what I'm hoping on this one is, because we've had you guys directly engage the entire time, that we can't fool ourselves into thinking we have something better than we have. We know exactly where our warts are. We know the problems we have to address. We are putting our resources to address those problems. That will come out with a much better game on the other end. That's my hope. We'll see. It's like I said, it's been a really interesting and completely unique process.
Okay, so I think that's it for us for today.
Well, thanks for doing this. It was fun.
Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody. I mean, certainly our guild leader guests who were here and chatted with Todd, but also everybody who showed up in the chat channel. You guys, like I said, I have been copying and pasting questions like a mad woman over here. There's some great stuff. I'm going to split it out into categories so that I can direct questions to the actual dev team members that would be the best people to answer these. And I think, we can probably get a lot of these answered in maybe on the forums, or even if it's a lot of questions that are kind of on the same topic, maybe even a news update. I also want to mention that we know from seeing the numbers that people who, especially our streamers, even small streamers, like people who are just starting out, make such a huge difference for us and for helping us to build this community. And I just want all of you to know how much we appreciate it. Like every time I catch a streamer on, I try to at least sit in for a few minutes, let them know that I'm there. I'll share the link with the team. And if people are able to, they might pop in and watch for a little bit. We may not always talk, but we're watching. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of our team, because we know that those streams make such a huge difference, not just for getting more eyeballs on Crowfall, but for people who may have started playing and they don't quite understand. I mean, we're just getting started with the new player experience. So having streamers who can answer questions, and just the way that our streamers support each other, is incredible. So if you are a streamer and I haven't been by to check out your channel yet, email me. It's community@crowfall.com. Let me know that you're there, and I will do my best to show up. And if we can, we'll send people like through our social media over to check out your channel. So thank you for that. Thank all of you in the community. All of you bring joy to our lives, some by posting more and some by posting less. And on that happy note, we're going to sign off. Thank you all again, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you appreciate this recording, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. See you guys in game.